Hey guys, welcome to the follow-up video on the Midwest Cathode Beamer. First off, I want to thank you for all the responses I got and some of the great research you guys have done. It greatly increased my knowledge of this device and the history of the company. In particular, this document that Don sent to me that fills in a lot of the missing pieces. So I knew right away when I saw this that, hey, it looks a lot like a device called the Cathode Beamer by Raytronics, but this one clearly has Midwest Instrument Corporation on the front. And I thought that maybe Raytronics made it and it was rebranded for Midwest, or I wasn't sure what was going on. Well, this article that Don sent me explains it all. It was invented by Midwest Instrument Corporation of Detroit, Michigan. They developed the tester. Then Raytronics bought them out, I believe is what happened. Yeah, down here, the Cincinnati firm recently purchased all the assets, patents, inventories, trade name, and goodwill of the Midwest Instrument Corporation Detroit for $100,000. So it was originally created, invented, marketed by Midwest, then Raytronics bought them lock, stock, and barrel. Which means the Midwest is the early version, and I suspect there are far fewer of them out there. That gentleman on the right, Joseph Carrick, was the former sales manager of Midwest, and he's now in charge of tester sales for Raytronics. And clearly shown in the picture is the version that I have. Now, Raytronics has some differences, and I think they were done for sake of safety. We'll talk more about that later when I show you the insides of it, but there are definitely some shortcomings to this design. What I also want to talk about is what CRT testers restorers are and are not, and a little bit of the background. So one, I got to say, I was flat out wrong about my thinking of the timeline of when cathode ray tube testers came out and were made available to servicemen and started being used on a regular basis. Here's a schematic for the Raytronics again. It turns out that, here was my thinking. I figured by the time the TVs first hit the market, realistically late 46 was when RCA came out with their flagship model, that there were picture tube testers available at the same time. Turns out, no, that is not the case. I figured, well, there were tube testers that were going back to the 30s, so they must have had picture tube testers right away. No, they didn't. This Raytronics, which came out in the mid-50s, I think was the first, or certainly one of the first, picture tube testers, and certainly the first restorer rejuvenator. And that this article talks about that. And they talk about if your picture tube developed problems like in the late 40s, you would have just bought a new picture tube and thrown away the old one. Similarly with rebuilding picture tubes, I don't think was a thing until well into the 50s. And in hindsight, someday I want to do a video and talk a little bit about how many of these TVs were actually made. But just briefly, in like 46, 47, very, very few TVs were sold. It wasn't until you get into the early 50s where there were millions of TVs. So there just wasn't much of a market for picture tubes in 46, 47. And then, of course, it took a few years for TVs to be used by the public to develop any significant volume of there being problems or need to even test a picture tube. So, in hindsight, it makes sense that it wasn't until the 50s that there was a need for rejuvenating picture tubes. So this device makes all sorts of promises about what it can do and how to do it, like enlarging the grid aperture opening. No other device ever made that I know of could do that. I think because some of these ideas turned out to not be very practical or didn't work very well. So they just, ceased to exist, basically. So, there's another aspect to it, too. That aspect is covered a bit more in this ad for the Electrolytics Beamer, where they talk about all the whiz-bang, awesome things it can do. Part of their sales pitch to repairmen was, think about all the money you're going to make using this device from your customers. And, it was a bit of a shady industry because, like, you take this portable version I have here, you bring it over to your customer who says, hey, my picture's looking a little weak. Well, rather than taking the TV chassis out, bringing it back to the shop and troubleshooting it, you could hook this up to the picture tube, hit a few buttons, make the picture brighter, and get paid right then and there and be on your way. Similarly with picture tube brighteners, which would boost the filament voltage to make the picture brighter. In both cases, that may not be the problem. Maybe the high voltage is low on the set. Maybe the grid biasing voltage isn't quite right. But rather than troubleshooting any of that, you just kind of bake the picture tube to make it brighter for a while. That's the other thing. These are not permanent fixes. When a cathode is worn out, it's worn out. Yes, they can become poisoned if they're not used over a long period of time. And you can clear some of that out by baking it for a while or rejuvenating it. But that doesn't mean it's going to be a permanent fix and they're going to get years more life out of the picture tube. I mean, think about it. Picture tube electron gun is the same technology as you'd find like in an audio output tube. And if, hey, you could push a button and magically fix a picture tube, why couldn't you do the same thing to an expensive high-end audio output tube? It's because there's physical limitations to how much you can squeeze out of a cathode before it's just used up. So these were kind of gimmicky in a way. I mean, yeah, if there's a short and you could clear it out, great, but why was there a short in the first place? Maybe some material broke off the picture tube. Maybe it has a manufacturing defect. I'm not saying you can't fix it. I'm not saying you won't get a better picture, but it's not the same as replacing the picture tube. You're not really fixing it. You're kind of more like putting a Band-Aid on it. But anyways, that's into gimmicky things like this. And so, so some of you have pointed out, here are the accessories that I'm missing. This is an off-the-shelf medical massager. And in the previous article I showed you, they told the brand name. So I'm going to search for that. I think I've already found some examples of this exact model online. I'm going to try to pick one up off of eBay. It was not made by Electrolytics or Midwest. They just bought an off-the-shelf vibrator and just threw it into the accessory compartment. Same with this high voltage coil. That's a device sold for testing fluorescent light bulbs. Off the shelf, made by a third party. And notice this doesn't have the jacks on the front to plug them in. They plug into the wall directly on their own. They are literally separate things they bought, made by somebody else that they just threw in with this product. Let's take a closer look at the text in this ad. The exclusive Cumotron improved Raytronic gas test is now the only circuit for commercial use that employs the same circuitry and voltages used in picture tube laboratories, giving direct readings in fractions of 1 microamp. I don't know what any of that means, but it sure sounds impressive, doesn't it? The Raytronic Beamer makes 5 repairs capable of restoring up to 85% of repairable tubes to satisfactory service. Again, kind of a lot of gobbledygook that boils down to maybe it'll fix or help out somewhat. Endorsed and used by leading TV tube and set manufacturers and their distributors after exhaustive tests. Thousands of users have verified every claim made for this instrument. I wonder if they really did sell thousands of these by that point, by the time this ad ran. They are reaping a new harvest of extra volume, extra profits, attracting new customers, winning loyalty, and boosting endorsements from old customers. And then they've got some endorsements down here. Raytronic Beamer is the best piece of test equipment I've ever used and will do more for the shop owner. It is actually worth more than many times its price and is so simple to operate. Okay. The first day we used the Raytronic Beamer, we repaired 20 CRTs. We save at least 1 CRT per day with this instrument and can't think of anything I would hate to part with more. Alright, who am I to doubt their words? What I do know is this device was only made for a year or two, and then Raytronics seems to have disappeared. I think there was one follow-up model, simplified, smaller unit, and then I think they just disappeared from history. I went and broke down the whole unit. Let's start with the boring stuff first. The cabinet. It's made out of, I think, 2, maybe 3 pieces of sheet metal that are tack welded together and then painted with crinkle paint. A very crude way the output connections come out the back. They just have wires coming out the back of the chassis and they just come out a slot in the back. No connectors, no plugs, nothing. The feet that were on there, I don't think were the original, and they were worn away, so I removed what was left of them and put 4 new feet on. It's painted with wrinkle paint. I could probably repaint it. I'm torn. So unfortunately, the only bad spot is in the most visible place on the cabinet, which is right here, and it's a little bit corroded. Eventually, maybe, I think all the hardware come off pretty easily. So as you'll see, this whole unit is kind of crude. And I think that goes back to the company's history that this was a small outfit. This was their first product, I believe. And while it may not be a prototype, I don't think it's too far removed from it. Especially with the painting on the front panel, I'll show you in a moment. It may have very well been done by hand. I've mentioned this isn't the safest unit. Well, there's a few reasons why. For one, kind of a unique feature to this tester is they put high voltage on the second anode. Most testers do not. They just test the electron gun with the heater, the cathode G1 and G2. Sometimes G2 is referred to as the first anode, and the high voltage connector at the front of the CRT being the second anode. Gets a little confusing sometimes, but G2 is essentially A1. It's the plate of the electron gun. And then this goes to the coating on the front of the CRT, this. That's what really accelerates the electrons towards the phosphor face. Well, look how this is terminated. It's a friggin' alligator clip. There's 2500 volts DC on this. So you may be thinking, well, how in the world can anybody ever clip this on while the unit's powered up? Well, if you trace it out, notice there are some insulated wires going to this relay. I believe that they use this relay to disconnect the 2500 volts from this connector, so that there's only voltage on this when you depress the test button on the front panel. I would not trust this relay to protect my life while I'm hooking this up. Imagine this arced or shorted out, or the relay became engaged, or somebody was pulling a prank on you and pushed the button while you're holding this. That would not be much fun. I got a comment from another owner of this unit who has one where this circuit was cut out, and he had to buy a second unit just to complete it. That may very well be why. And I mentioned too that how should I put this? Well, it goes back to the history of this unit, that this was like one of the first, maybe the first tester to have rejuvenation capabilities, repair capabilities. I think some of these weren't such a great idea, which is why there are no other testers that have it. And I think this is definitely one of the features that went by the wayside. The other thing, or one other thing that I think, well, that I noticed, so Midwest, this was made by the earlier company. When Raytronics took them over and released this, if you look close at the front panel, there are some differences. Most notably, these two jacks do not exist. The vibrator jack and the HF coil jack. Those power accessories. And those accessories run off 120 volts AC. So I do believe they have 120 volts AC going to these jacks, which are just quarter-inch phono jacks, I do believe. Which I don't know that they're rated for that voltage, but even if they are, again, not the most safe thing to have, just coming out through some holes in the front panel of a device. As you plug or unplug the jack, it seems to me there's a possibility they could short, or something could go into that hole and certainly cause problems. So the subsequent models eliminated these two, and the accessories had their own AC plug to plug directly into the wall. They weren't powered via the front panel. Let's take a closer look at the chassis. It's just a very generic rectangular chassis. Could very well have been done with a small production run with using chassis punches. Everything's mounted with screws and nuts, which is another indication that it was small production run, maybe assembled by hand. Things that were more mass produced would have used rivets. As a number of you pointed out, the front panel is connected to the main chassis by Jones connectors, I think you guys call them, like they use in pinball games. I've never worked on a pinball game, but I'm sure you guys are correct in that. So I was able to pry them out. It took a little bit of effort using a screwdriver to slowly pry them apart, but I was successful in the end. So if you recall back in the schematic, we have a high voltage transformer. It just powers the filament on the rectifier tube, and there's a high voltage secondary. There's a big old filter cap. So when people talk about this being lethal or man killer, this is what they're talking about. Yeah, all tube equipment has potentially lethal voltages and currents in it, but this especially so, being it's 2500 volts with a decent amount of current behind it, being a direct direct transformer off the line's voltage rather than a flyback, which is inherently current limiting. So, assuming I got this operational when I put this near ground, I should be able to draw a pretty healthy arc out of it. That arc will sustain. In other words, it's got some current behind it. High voltage with very low current will sting, but it won't kill you. High voltage with a sufficient current along with it will. You will not see this in any other picture tube tester, that's for sure. These are the filament transformers. And these are dual seleniums on each side. These form like a voltage quadrupler, I believe, within this 4 electrolytics down below. I don't know why they spaced them so far apart, but really these could go side by side. It's 4 diodes. It's not a bridge rectifier, it's a voltage quadrupler. And then there's a couple relays, a couple tubes. There's not a whole lot to it. And down below, likewise, there's not a whole lot to it. Here are the 4 electrolytics. They are some Beaver caps, Beaver dry etched foil electrolytic capacitor, 30 microfarad, 450 volts. So these 4 connect to those 4 selenium rectifiers. There's another selenium down here. I don't recall exactly what that's for. A relay, a few resistors, 1 and 2 watt, and then a couple huge ones over here. And that's it. Oh, sorry, one more relay over here. So on the front panel, a bunch of the controls are push button. Those push buttons, I believe, activate these relays. So rather than having all the voltage and current being switched by the push button on the front panel, it just activates the coil on the relay, and the relay does the switching. So that's about it. There's not much to it. So what am I going to do with it? Am I going to fully restore it and make it my main picture tube tester? No. Will I try to restore it and get it somewhat working? Yeah. And I'll even look for the accessories. But I've got better time. I mean, you know, for all the bells and whistles and claims they make, I've got testers that are much newer, have a better proven track record, made by reputable companies that have been used by many others, and I've used my Sencor CR70 is still my go-to. But this is fun. This is cool. I want this out on display. I want these lights to light up. I'd like to at least be able to do the continuity and the shorts testing and check the emissions. So I do plan on getting all those functions to work. I've had some success cleaning it up. I think this is about as good as it's going to get. Unfortunately, one of the chicken head knobs broke in half when I was tightening the set screw down. So I'll have to try to find a replacement. Or maybe glue it back together, at least for now. Chicken head knobs are made in such a wide variety of styles. It might be a little tricky to find an exact match. I've cleaned up this front panel as best I can. Unfortunately, all these splotches is rust coming through from underneath the paint. Not much I can do about that. This pinstriping, I think, may very well have been done by hand, or at least it was masked by hand, because those lines are very uneven. And the paint that they used is somewhat water soluble. So I had to gingerly clean around the edge. I was able to get most of the dirt and grime off. So it's, I think, about as good as it's going to get. It's a little bit lighter here and there. Maybe a different type of cleaning product was tried by somebody. I'm not sure. I don't know if that probably is the right color, and if I was more aggressive on the cleaning in other areas, it would all become that color. Problem is the blue starts to wear off. The blue is not as water soluble as the red or orange, but it is somewhat. And considering it's already starting to wear off here and there, I don't want to do any more to this than has already been done. So I'm just going to, I think, put a coat of car wax over it to offer some protection. Because right now this is just, I get the impression, not the impression, I mean, clearly they painted this beige and then they applied this the red and the blue over that, and then did nothing. There's no clear coat over it. And whatever paint this is, it's not that great. Might be acrylic. It's not really good enamel paint. It comes off fairly easily. Taking a step back and looking at the basement here, my plans are evolving. So they finished with the ductwork down here. They did add a new run here, and there's a little loop down there. And I was talking about putting in a workbench back there. No. I mean, as my friend pointed out when we were down here, I want to make an 8-foot wide workbench that would extend well past that wall out to, like, here. That really wouldn't work too well. Plus, this... I'm kidding myself. I would whack my head on this stuff all the time. It's way too low. So what I got to thinking was, I've been going through the process of what do I do commonly all the time with projects. I need to disassemble it like I have here and do triage on it, you know, determine is it restorable, what's missing, that kind of stuff. So I need an area to do that. What else do I do all the time? I need to get access to parts, so I've been organizing all my parts. I don't know that I'll permanently have them all set up here, but I've been organizing all my parts, I've been organizing all my tubes. But another thing I need to do all the time is to test stuff, test tubes, test picture tubes. And normally I've got all my testers, like these, they're all folded up and packed away, and whenever I use them, I need to pull them out again and set them up, and then when I'm done, I put them away again. I'm thinking, I do that so often, it's silly. Why don't I make a dedicated area? So I ordered up a couple kits for making benches or shelves out of 2x4s. I am going to make some sort of setup over here. I think it'll just be basically a workbench with a shelf below it, out of 2x4s, a couple pieces of plywood, nothing fancy, that just fits right into this area. Got 4 outlets there, and I'll make it low, and I will permanently set up some tube testers, some picture tube testers, and some extra stuff on the shelf below, maybe the most commonly used tubes or extra testers, and I'm going to have them out and ready to go all the time, and that's where I intend to set this up. And I'm hoping I can get it working well enough that when I get a new chassis in like this and I want to test the 10BP4, I can just plug it directly into this and check out the basic stuff. If it needs rejuvenation or something, I'll probably use a different tester, but just to see if, you know, if it's good or dead or whatnot, I would like to use this tester. That's my plan. Hope you enjoyed this follow-up look at a Midwest Cathode Beamer